Good evening, everyone. Happy Friday the 13th, and welcome to your last stop on the KGRA Friday Night Live lineup. Taking you right through the midnight Eastern, I am Jill Hanson, and this is the Q.Science Project, your talk radio source for full-spectrum interdisciplinary exploration into the nature of consciousness, perception, and reality. Now on to tonight's show. In the last segment of tonight's show, Dr. Michael Lennox will be stopping in to give us our quarterly infusion of positive vibes, as well as catch us up to speed on what the current articulation of cosmic geometries may be telling us about the goings-on of humanity. But first, beginning now and until about 11:30 p.m. Eastern tonight, we will be journeying back in time to witness and contemplate the practices of ancient Scandinavian shamanism with shamanic healer and author Evelyn Rysdyk. Evelyn will be joining us to explore some widely forgotten and obscured insights into our fundamental reality, insights which have been gleaned piece by piece from ancient traditions that were preserved as memories in the folk traditions of Northern Europe. Her phenomenal book is called The Norse Shaman, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to speak with a woman who not only talks the talk through research and writing, but truly walks the walk with ritual and practice. Evelyn, thank you so much for being here tonight. Welcome to the Q.Science Project.
I'm delighted. It's so nice to have a show on in a time slot that feels better for me.
You did mention you stay up a little bit later, so I'm actually grateful for that. Some guests aren't so keen, but
works for me.
Hey, I'm on board with it. So now I didn't even give much of an introduction for you. You have a very rich personal history, and I think it's always better to, at least for the most part, allow a person to kind of, in their own voice, give light to the experience and knowledge that they have. So to start off tonight's show, I would really love for you to just kind of go over your past accomplishments and what through your life has brought you to this point.
Well, that's quite a conversation.
2 hours in and of itself, right? At least.
Exactly. But I'd like to just talk about my own kind of evolution, because I think that's really a part of the work. And I'm originally trained as an artist. And at one point in my 30s, I really hit the wall with a depression. And along with all the usual going to the therapist and having medication to be able to sleep at night, these are the pre-Prozac days, I looked for something else to help me regain my a wider perspective. I have the experience when depressed that the world narrows down, rather like the view a horse gets with blinders on. Mm-hmm. And as part of that exploration, I looked around for something to kind of jumpstart. And I wound up with Michael Harner learning how to journey, doing the shamanic journey process. And that experience, the very first journey I took, actually, that experience gave me that feeling of possibility in my life again. So it's the sense of the blinders get pulled off, and while there was no specific possibility, it was this extraordinary opening up process. And in journeys, I had the sensation that this was the place I knew as a child. As a little girl, I remember asking my parents about a place I remembered. And we used to do car trips and what have you in the late 50s, early 60s. And I would describe this place, and they would explain, well, is it this, or is it that, or is it the trip we took here? And I realized they were not hitting the nail on the head. So I would try again to try to explain it. And, and I realized once I did the journey process and had this opening up experience, I was in the place that I remembered as a child.
Wow.
Most children are really expanded. And I think more so even today, that kids hold on to that well into their adulthood, actually. But that feeling of being connected to everything, having an expanded awareness of the beings that were around me, the space in which I was in, being connected to all other spaces and all other times, that was a pivotal place in my growth. And subsequently, I had trained with a lot of different tribal shamans. I trained for a long period of time with Michael Harner and Sandra Engerman. than tribal shamans from all around the world. And I had this just continuing richness coming into my life, where I had this sense of, this must be an old way that all of us knew in human past. You know, it seems so different from the way we live our ordinary life, and yet because it's so widespread, and that perception, no one taught me about that when I was a little girl, and yet I had it. So that way of knowing the world and even ourselves in that way seemed to be something very, very, very old. And, people talk about, shamanism is 60,000 years old. But I think we've been wired for this for a much, much longer period of time. We've had our connections kind of enculturated out of us. And my journey really has been to kind of connect the dots back to having this authentic experience, and to help people go to that sort of same place, to be able to take the blinders off, open up their hearts, open their ability to perceive, and have that same experience, which is very fulfilling. So in this journey of visiting with tribal shamans, I became more interested in my own heritage. I grew up with 2 Norwegian grandparents on one side of the family, the other side of my family, rich with Germans and Dutch people and English people. And I thought, well, if this is really a universal experience, there must be some way for me to tap in to the connections my more recent ancestors had. Never mind the 60,000-year-old ones, but the more recent ones. And so I went on this search looking for the, kind of unraveling a garment, where you pull on a thread and you follow it back. And that led, that led me through to this work. And over the last 15, 20 years, I shifted from being primarily a visual artist to a writer. So this was really a journey on paper of that unraveling the path, of looking through all those different doorways to find the threads that lead us really to our American culture in a lot of ways, because our American culture, while it's very diverse now, really has its roots in the cultures of Northern Europe. And those cultures the traditions infuse what happens in our contemporary culture from the point of view that it tends to be a patriarchal culture, as many other Indo-European root cultures are. But to look for those threads was, I think, for me at least, very critical, because I'm sitting here in North America. The people that created the most recent part of my DNA are from Northern Europe, and yet the more ancient part of my DNA goes all over Europe, into part of Asia, and of course down into Africa, where it has its origins. So to try to figure out all of those complexities was quite the journey, and I hope that it is useful for other people, because there are universal threads in there for all of us. There are some that are specific to Northern Europeans, but there is a kind of power, I think, in exploring how similar we are. By exploring our differences, we notice how similar we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then that's actually one of the things that I brought from your book. It reaffirmed and affirmed the fact that regardless of the individual culture that you're coming from, shamanism at its root comes from that same place. It's still that same doorway between humanity and that sacred space that not all of us, are privy to.
And I think when you're in that expanded experience of reality, those differences become things that enrich the conversation we have with one another instead of separate us. When I sit down with a shaman from the Central Asian Republic of Tuva, or one from Nepal, the Himalayan traditions, or any other place, our cultures are very different. Rather like the dogmas in particular branches of Christianity, all the dogmas are different, and yet the thread of that tradition is very similar. And the same thing is true about shamanism. The cultural rituals are all different. The words people use for things are different, and yet the basis of it is so similar. It really has to be because the experience is universal. I think of spiritual traditions are ways that we have come up with to try to replicate experiences.
Absolutely.
I think about that, particularly about our religious traditions on the planet, that they are sort of codified paths to try to replicate an experience that someone else had in the past. Why shamanism is different, at least in my worldview, is that rather than following a particular set of ritual steps to have the experience, you go directly and replicate the experience itself. You go
right.
to spirits.
And exactly, with the gifts that each of us as individuals were bestowed.
Absolutely. And that to me is really exciting, because just as I discovered that there are many more similarities than there are differences between shamans who practice all around the world, when we experience ourselves as connected to everything and every being, having this expanded perception that even our planet is part of a larger community of the solar system, a solar system is part of the larger community of our galaxy, and so forth, we have a different way of perceiving what goes on in our ordinary life experience. We have an opportunity to see the bridges rather than the walls.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Now, I'm so glad that you brought up the issue of depression at the beginning of the show, because this is something that I wouldn't say I spend a lot of time thinking about it, but being in my position and, having so many friends on Facebook and via social media, I get to witness a lot. Mm-hmm. And what I witness is a lot of disconnection. I witness a lot of people who are disconnected from themselves, from each other, and from nature. And in the past couple of years, there's been a conversation going on, in the mental health community about the root causes of depression being in that disconnect to self, to each other, to nature, to every fundamental thing that we are reaching for and that makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
I totally agree. And in fact, one of my earlier books, Spirit Walking, A Course in Shamanic Power, I focus on the fact that we need to be in what I call reverent, participatory relationships with the beings around us. And we have to be retaught how to do relationship in our culture. Yeah. It's extraordinary because tribal cultures, people know how to be with each other and the natural world. In fact, the more quote unquote primitive the culture, the more they do connectivity well.
Well, right. I think we are taught disconnection. I don't think that disconnection is an innate human quality. That's something that culturally, at least here in the West, is something that we've adopted and is just passed from generation to generation.
Well, the suburban lifestyle in particular, and a large percentage of people in the United States, at least, are living in a suburban area, which means you have your own little parcel of land or your own little apartment space. And your life tends to happen within the boundaries of that either piece of property or the boundaries of your apartment. It's not the same as growing up in a village situation. It's very different than even 100 or 200 years ago. So there is this built-in isolation where a very few people are all that you have to work with in terms of getting your needs met. And of course, a few people cannot do that when we're wired to be social primates. We ask a lot of the few people that are in our immediate family to try to fill all the roles that would have been filled by a whole group of tribal people. We'd have a whole selection of tribal elders to go to if we had issues. There would be less feeling of somehow not being fulfilled or being continually disappointed by the people around you. And I think that happens simply because it's too few people, all with so similar an experience, that you don't get that broader view that helps you to be comfortable in your own skin and comfortable with relating to other people. They did a marvelous research project between two groups of people that lived in a very similar landscape near to one another. One of the groups was a hunter-gatherer group, and one was practicing rudimentary agriculture. And based on their lifestyles, the children that were raised in the hunter-gatherer communities were far more secure. They had a sense of the world being a place that was nurturing, that they would be cared for. So they were much more happy and secure kids than the agricultural kids. So you think about a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the entire world feeds you. If you're a baby and your mom is doing something, you are passed to another elder and perhaps another even nursing mother. So you are receiving nurturance all the time, and you're even very rarely set down when you're a baby. On the other hand, if your mom is having to hoe a field or plant seeds, there's a good chance part of the time you will be set down. And because it's a farm situation where it's their own particular property, there may not be someone close by to take care of you. And farmers intrinsically have anxiety about the natural world in that, will they have enough rain? Will storms wash their crops away? Will they be beset by insects or some other creature that might destroy the crops? So there is, I think, more anxiety in that condition of living, which we have grown from that agricultural tradition. So we went from agriculture to, different kinds of manufacturing and, industry, and now we're in a post-industrial age. And so that disconnection and the change in relationship with the natural world continues to dog us. Now, with awareness, we can reclaim the best of what is lost. I don't suggest that people go back to being hunter-gatherers, because I don't think the world can support that. But we could reclaim that way of being, that way of understanding, that small communities of people working together to raise children. And there are play groups and things that help build those bridges. But I think with some consciousness, we could remember that we are a particular kind of animal that thrives in relationship. And that also works in tribal cultures, because a shaman has to be in relationship with all the beings around them, because shamans are not intrinsically powerful, although each being has its own power. But in order to accomplish their work, they borrow power. They borrow power from animals, from plants, from trees, from natural features and forces. So you have to be in relationship to be able to borrow something. And you also have to be in gratitude and giving back in order to keep that relationship whole.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really, truly appreciated about your book, The Norse Shaman, Evelyn, is the fact that it's almost centered around actual shamanic journeying. So at the end of each of your chapters, you have an actual journey that anyone who's reading your book can attempt to make that connection and go through the process, which is phenomenal. It implies that each and every one of us has that potential within us, or has access to that potential.
Well, it's also important, I think, to get your wisdom firsthand.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
My perception, but when you go and introduce yourself to spirits, have a first person wired right into your nervous system experience of whatever it happens to be that I'm talking about in the book, it's a very different experience. It's not just you thinking about what I've written, but you using what I've written as a jump off place for you to have your own experience, for you to smell and taste and hear and feel with your heart what it is that I've been talking about in words. And that is a very different experience.
It is. And honestly, I think that is, like you said, the best way for each of us to not only learn, but to find that connection that we've lost on all levels.
Well, also because our culture tends to be very mind-centered. You know, I think the last 500 years ago, we put the brain up on a pedestal.
Yes.
And
right. And so book, it's all you can.
Right. Just the book. Yeah. It must be important. It tends to the mind, and it's the written word or whatever it might be. And it's at the expense of our heart and the way that we connect. So anytime you can do a first-person experience and feel it with your physical body, feel it with your own nervous system, you integrate it in a completely different way. I think that's actually one of the powerful reasons that ritual is so useful in shamanic work, because what you're doing is engaging all of your being when you do a ritual. You have a strong intent, so you don't throw your brain out with the bathwater. You know, you use your mind to come up with a clear intent. Your mind helps you to organize what you need for your ritual, but then in ceremony, you're having a physical, emotional experience. And you're also using that experience to program your subconscious about this is what's important.
Yes, and it becomes rooted in your physiology.
Absolutely. It actually changes. Yeah. Journeying actually changes how you're wired. And when you're doing ceremony and ritual, you're making it part of the fiber of your being. Whatever you're doing, I do a lot of gratitude kind of offerings. That's very typical in shamanic culture. You're always thanking the beings around you, thanking Mother Nature. All of that is part of the experience. And each time you're doing that, you are building a bridge between the world that you can perceive with your senses and the world that you cannot perceive with your senses. So because I'm making an offering, a concrete offering with my physical body, my emotional body, I'm putting out food for these beings that I cannot see with my eyes, I am teaching my subconscious the truth of their reality and helping to antidote the limited input that I get from my senses.
Beautiful. And right there, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in the conversation. It is time for a short break, everyone, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, there is much more exploration into the Norse Shaman, ancient spirituality of the Northern tradition on the way. We have Evelyn Rysdyk with us. You're listening to the Q.Science Project on the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, your source for the best in alternative paranormal UFO and new science talk radio on the planet. Please stay with us. Welcome back from the break, everyone, and thank you for sticking around for more of tonight's The Q.Science Project. I am Jill Hanson, your host this and every Friday night from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern, right here on KGRA The Planet. If you're just tuning into tonight's broadcast, or maybe this is the first time you've ever heard the show, regardless of what brings you here, I am excited to have you along for this evening's exploration into the ancient spiritual practices of the Northern tradition with our guest, nationally respected shaman and healer, Evelyn Rysdyk. If you happen to have a topic-related question for Evelyn, let's get it on the air for you. Hop over to the KGRA Live interactive chat room at kgra.radio.com/chat room and drop your questions into the chat box in all caps. Or if you prefer, you can hit me up on Twitter by tagging at Q.Science using hashtag QPChat. Now, Evelyn, before we headed to the break, we did actually have a couple of questions come in from the chat room. So if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and address those right now. Okay. So the first question, let's see here, comes from X Lady. And the question, Evelyn, is, have you ever seen the series Vikings? And if so, what do you think about the scenes involving shamanism?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't seen it. It's actually sitting here. A friend just gave me all the DVDs, so I have to reserve judgment on it.
And you're going to have to get back to us because that's a great question. It wouldn't have occurred to me to ask it, but I would be very curious to get your take on that as well. It's a good show. All right. The next question. Evelyn, are you familiar with shamans using ayahuasca for rituals in South America?
I am, and I also know they use other substances in Peru, like the San Pedro cactus, and those are marvelous methods for actually having the door kicked open. It's rather like when you open the door with a key or the police come and knock the door down. And something about those chemical methods get your head out of the way very quickly. They are not for everybody. Some people are on medications, for instance, so they can't use those kinds of substances. For some people, their constitution couldn't tolerate it, and yet they are very effective, and they have medicinal qualities as well as the capacity to open up to that expanded point of view. So I think for many people, it is very beneficial, but you have to also find the right shaman to work with when you do it.
Right. Now, when you said to have the right constitution for it, do you mean physically or mentally? Like you mentally have to be properly prepared for the experience at hand? Or is it just simply that some people's bodies are not, up to the task?
I think it's both. Remember, when we as Western people travel down, North American Westerners, we travel down to the jungle, we have we don't have the level of cultural preparation. We don't have the level of psychological preparation. And many of us don't have the physical preparation for the purgative experience that you have with some of these substances. So I would say that really across the board, the psychological preparation is really important. And you would have been enculturated if you were from that area, you would have been enculturated about what to expect. You would have heard stories your entire life. You would have a sense of the iconography you might experience, the quality of what it's like. You may have seen someone taking the sacred vine, and then what happened to them? How did they experience that? You would have more preparation, a lifetime of it really, before you used it. And I think we tend to, I think this is one of the negative parts of our culture. We tend to pick and choose different things from different cultures to have a particular experience, but there's a kind of colonial arrogance about it in my mind, because we're not immersing ourselves in the full experience, because that's a cultural tradition that is based on hundreds and perhaps thousands of years of preparation that those people carry in their DNA, in their cultural experience, in their emotional body, that we don't have when we just go down and have a couple of weeks in the jungle to have an experience.
And that actually touches upon one of the things that I wanted to explore with you a little bit, the idea of this genetic knowing that we have. You know, each of us, we have this makeup, this biological makeup, and science tells us that DNA is where that comes from. And there's all these new theories about DNA and what DNA is or could be, what it all means. But this sense that each of us, whether we're conscious of it or not, we do come from a very diverse and rich background, and somehow there is this knowing from our lineage that remains with us to this day. And one of the amazing things about the work that you do, Evelyn, is, the gift of being able to pause in time and kind of go back in a sense to explore our roots in a very real and tangible, yet mystical way. And it's a very great point that the people who grew up in those cultures that use ayahuasca regularly, it's with not only within their culture, their outward culture, but those experiences, that knowing is imbued and embedded in their being. So it goes even beyond that.
You're absolutely right. And again, it's such a shift in mindset for us, having grown up in the United States, and you might have people that listen a lot further away because you're broadcasting on the internet.
Yeah, we people from all over the place.
So I can only share the experience that we have here. When I have my kind of anthropologist mindset on, I see that we also approach spirituality in our culture from a kind of colonial mindset, where it
is, and again, it's very intellectual as well, not just colonial, but intellectual. We intellectualize everything and engage everything with our mind. Yeah.
And I think that is a great, it's a great distancer, if there is such a word. When you travel as somebody with a different kind of culture, a different place of power, truthfully, in the way that you were raised, you enter into another culture having, there's sort of the Disneyland experience that troubles me about the way people enter spiritual traditions to have an experience. But having an experience is not something that will change you necessarily for the rest of your life. And I think we need to reawaken our awareness of how we were meant to be in relationship with the planet, in relationships with each other, with the other beings on the planet. We need to reawaken that way of knowing, because our planet needs that from us. We have spread the furthest from any other species. We are shaping the planet to our will, and there's widespread destruction as a part of that. And so I think we really do, I feel we really do, it's a think and feel thing, that we need to remember as the opposite of being dismembered. Remember who we actually are. Take our arrogance and peel it away a little bit and remember that we also are animals. Yes, we're highly intelligent, but we are social primates. We are no more or less important than any other being on the planet, in spite of what we have told ourselves. We are so egocentric as a species. It's really remarkable. Yes. The name for our species is actually Homo sapiens sapien. So sapien means wise. So we had to call ourselves wise human. That's like a Chinese restaurant saying it's yummy Chinese food. If they have to tell you it's yummy, it probably isn't yummy. So I think that insecurity that we had, that we named ourselves wise, tells me that we're missing that piece of really understanding our place. And in understanding our place, feeling the security of connection. Just like a child needs to have that bonding with adults in order to be a healthy adult themselves, they have to have that connection. And children that don't get proper connection wind up with different kinds of mental issues as they grow up, and emotional issues. We are wired for that way of being. We were meant to be that way. We have taught ourselves something else, but because it's learned information, we can simply learn it differently again. So it's like, there is no more Yugoslavia. I learned about Yugoslavia in school. There is no more Yugoslavia. Now you have to learn the different countries that part of the world has become. So it's not that, learning something new, it's something we do all the time. And if we can do that about ourselves, we stand a chance of changing the trajectory we have right now on the planet.
I think that's absolutely true. And the way I've always thought of it is, rather than learning something new, when we're dealing with things like shamanism, what we're really doing is we're peeling back the layers to reveal what's already there underneath. We just have to maybe adjust the language that we're using, the metaphor that we're using to engage in order to kind of find ourselves in that spirit space.
Right. You're absolutely right. but in the body, it does feel like you're going, oh, wow, cool. I didn't know that. Well,
yeah, it does. Now, Evelyn, would you suggest then for everyone out there listening who, I would imagine that, considering how, at least at this point in human history, we're all mutts. I mean, there must be, between 3 and 5 and 10 and 15 different shamanic histories within each one of us if we go back far enough. Some of us may, be a little bit more in touch in the current space with their lineage. Others may not. But would you recommend that people become familiar with their lineage and then, at least as an introduction to shamanism or journeying, use the shaman, their shaman roots from that culture?
I think that's helpful because it's a way for you to learn that your ancestors did this too. And we don't have to look, we have a thing about, it's very much a part of our country's history. We had this idea of manifest destiny, which is the idea that we need that property that's over the hill because it might be better, the grass might be greener over there. We tend to have that mindset about spirituality too, I think. And when we recognize it's like, wait a minute, hold down, slow down, the sacred land is right under your feet. Everything around you is aware, it's awake, it's available to you to know on a very deep level. And once we start to recognize that who we are and where we are is the perfect starting place. We don't have to go far away. We don't have to, transform ourselves by learning a different language or whatever it is. We can start right where we are and shift the perspective that we have about who we are and where we have been planted. Because when we start to recognize our own sacredness, the sacredness of all the beings around us, and the sacredness of the land right beneath our feet, wherever we happen to be planted, that's when we change our perspective about the wider world.
Right. Okay. We do have some more questions coming in from the chat room, Evelyn. This one is, how do shamans get their gift? Are they born with it or taught it?
I think everybody's born with it. And I think some people have a natural ability to do it more easily. There's a wonderful person who's got a PhD in the UK, and he believes that humans expanded consciousness every evening while they were sitting around a fire. Ooh. Fire flickers at the same rate as high alpha and theta wave state, which is typically used for those that use drumming or rattling for journeying. It's the same rate also. So watching a fire flicker, everything is sort of strobing around you to that particular rhythm that your mind entrains to. Our mind tends to entrain to rhythm. And that particular rhythm is the visionary state of awareness. So anybody who's sat long enough in front of a flickering fire knows you go someplace. You have these sort of flights of fantasy. You have this other experience. Time does not pass in the same way. And that is what our ancestors did every single night. And just like the person who was better at knapping flint or making cordage got that job as being the specialist in their group, somebody who was adept at receiving information and guidance while in that state of awareness and remembering all of that in the morning got the job of doing it again. And so I think that's probably where certain individuals got the assignment as shaman and then developed those gifts. And then you would have someone in the tribe that can encourage that in someone else if they showed that they were good at it. But the gift itself is inherently human. If everybody can do that, and then it's a matter of refining how you do it, how well you are able to connect, how you are able to borrow power to assist your community, to assist individuals. So there's two aspects. One is that everybody can do it. And on the second part is you do need to be trained and guided to learn how to reawaken those gifts and learn how to be in relationship with the world around you.
In which case, it's probably the best option to find someone to teach you. Find a shaman that is willing and able to kind of lead you through the process. Is that correct?
That's typically what happens in other cultures, certainly. But I think initially learning to journey is available in lots of different methods today, everything from webinars to reading a book and learning how to do it. And once you begin to open that up, you will feel shifts inside of yourself because, as I said, journeying, that act of expanding awareness actually changes how your mind works. Your intuition improves, your ability to synthesize new information improves, your memory improves, your imagination gets more rich. And those tools can help you to even be more confident about choosing the right person to study with.
Okay. Let's see, one more question. What are shamans doing with veterans that have PTSD other than providing ayahuasca?
Oh, there are some people that are working with them doing journeying, and not just ayahuasca, because that's only one tool available for shamans and shamanic practitioners. But journeying itself and rituals of releasing pain, restoration of their spirits, because most veterans who have PTSD have suffered soul loss. So restoration of their soul essences, releasing them from any spiritual energy that they picked up in wartime that is unbeneficial, it doesn't belong to them. So tending to the soul, I think, is a critical part of somebody that has PTSD. Restoring them to a sense of wholeness about themselves, and that is then the stepping stone of helping them to reintegrate themselves into their family, into their local society, into their culture. Because there's a terrible shift that has to happen when you are a soldier, where you have to see someone across from you, whether you're seeing them through a telescope, binoculars, or they're just a blip on a screen. You know that those are people, and you have to shift your mind to say, no, they are the enemy. And yet some part of us always knows, those of us with a healthy psyche at any way, some part of us always knows that we are annihilating part of ourselves when we kill another human being. We are annihilating someone that could be a family member. It could be your mother, our father, our brother, our sister. There, even with the enculturation that you receive in the military, there is a part of you that retains that awareness. And to have the experience of having to shut down so much of your humanity in order to be a good soldier it's a kind of separation from the self. You know, you have to separate yourself from your own humanity. And so that restoration really has to happen on a physical level, an emotional level, a societal level, and also on a spiritual level, that restoration of their own wholeness. Right.
Now, I'm curious because it's very interesting to me how many of these tools that are used through shamanism and just generally speaking holistically is the relationship between humans and plants. So we have things like cannabis, we have ayahuasca, we have different substances, psychedelic substances, which also come from plants, DMT. And I'm curious, from a shamanic perspective, Evelyn, what is the relationship between humanity and these plants who seem, there's so many of them that are like, help us, want to help?
Well, I think probably our deep ancestors saw these as a kind of soul medicine because we have receptors in our brain for mescaline, and there are mescaline-like compounds in a lot of these plants. So there is a need, I think, for us to have expanded experience because it's so universal. I think there's a profound need for it. It's part of what makes us whole. It may have contributed to how our brain evolved. And so there's a need for that. And so we can think of those plants as medicinal plants, just as we might think of, you take some elderberry syrup to keep from getting sick in the wintertime. These are part of the amazing pharmacopoeia that nature provides. Are they necessary for having that expanded experience? I don't think they are. However, they are incredibly beneficial in certain circumstances to help people to get unstuck. Because sometimes we can be so enculturated to separation that we almost have a barrier between us and our expanded selves. And the plants are very good at getting us to sort of break through that barrier. In fact, they kind of push us through.
I think that's a good
analogy. It takes over your chemistry. Poof. And so that can be very beneficial for some people, because some people have a more difficult time getting into the headspace, I will say, to be able to journey. But I think everybody can do it if they give themselves permission to. And then the plant medicine can be used for people who have the need to be reunited with the divine as part of their soul healing. That idea that some people need to be carried and triaged because they are deeply unwell spiritually. And I think the plants are really good doctors when somebody is in that place, that they're so dispirited they really need emergency medicine. And the plants can do that for us because they can jumpstart the process. But if someone has been nurtured to some degree in their lives and has an awareness of self and the capacity to experience their own vulnerability in a positive way, then I think it's far easier for those individuals to be able to connect using repetitive dancing or journeying or other ways that don't require a chemical.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely critical to understand that this ability is inherent within any of us. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, a lot of us have different layers of enculturation. The patriarchal culture is only about 6,000 years old, but boy, oh boy, has it really changed our experience of ourselves and how we experience the natural world.
Yeah.
That idea that somehow we are hierarchically more important than anything else on the planet is an illusion, but boy, it's a persistent one, I tell you. We've been enculturated for 6,000 years to believe that that's true.
It definitely. And I think that when we come back from the break, a great place to start would maybe be prior to the patriarchy, and you actually go into this somewhat into the book, the importance of female shamans and feminine energy and the different symbols that you and the people that work within shamanism, within Norse shamanism and other cultures around the world, all of these symbols and what they mean. So everybody, when we come back from the break, we will dive much deeper into that. We are here tonight with Evelyn Rysdyk. We'll talk to you in just a second. Welcome back to Friday Night on the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, everyone. I'm Jill Hanson, host of the Q.Science Project, which brings the front lines of the new science revolution to your doorstep in digital HD every Friday night from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern. Tonight, our interdisciplinary exploration into the nature of consciousness and reality finds us in conversation with nationally recognized shamanic healer and author, Evelyn Rysdyk. And please, while you're listening tonight, take a moment to peruse Evelyn's website. That can be found at evelynrysdyk.com. Just for anyone who hasn't looked it up so far, I'm going to spell it for you. It is Evelyn, and Rysdyk is spelled RYSD as in dog, YK.com. This is last call for questions for Evelyn, so please join us right now in the KGRA Live Interactive chat room at kgraradio.com/chat room and get your last minute questions for Evelyn into the chat box in all caps. You can also tag at Q.Science or use hashtag QPChat on Twitter to get your questions in the mix. Now, you guys are burning it up in the chat room, so let's get to some of those questions. Evelyn, this is a great question. What about the role of music through meditative states or in shamanic practice? How instrumental, no pun intended, is the frequency or vibe in that capacity?
Well, we already talked about how rhythm is something that our brain entrains to. So certain rhythms actually support us to have different kinds of states of awareness. It also, music is something that works on our nervous system. It works on not just the upper brain. We do a lot of stuff up in our upper brain, the part of us that knows the alphabet and all those good things. But that lower part of our brain, that nervous system that makes us function in the world, is so affected by sound, so affected particularly by music, by rhythmic music in particular. So it gets into the bones, as anybody who really loves music knows. It's like our body becomes part of the instruments. It's like the crystal in our bones.
Yeah.
The way our nervous system is wired, we're that electrical kind of beings. We have this connection to music that I think is it's a tool that we can use. When we understand that we are affected by different things, we can use that to steer ourselves in the right direction. Just like you can put different kinds of music on when you're trying to study, or you're wanting to relax, or you're wanting to meditate, or you're wanting to journey, we can actually use that as one of our tools to steer us in the right direction. Because it's going to steer our physical body, it's going to steer our emotions, and eventually it changes the mind to get in that place. Usually the mind is the last one to catch up. So music is really beneficial, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that it's no coincidence that music is such a great percentage of people's passion, and how we, each of us has such a strong connection to sometimes one type of music over another. From the lyrics, the vibration of voice, to the vibration of instruments, to the rhythms. I think that all of those different things, even separate of each other, register on a very, very deep and fundamental level. So when you throw them all together, I think in a sense, when you're listening to the music you love, whether it's country music, whether it's jazz, you are experiencing altered states of consciousness. You are, to a certain extent, diving into that very deep space.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting in the past 20 to 30 years, where music from around the world has become interwoven. So different people's musical traditions have been interwoven with other musical traditions. So we have this sense of, being able to be comfortable with Indian rhythms and Indian skill. We have the ability to feel that we are comfortable and it feels good to our bodies to listen to African rhythms, African drumming, the way Africans use voice, and particularly in Southern Africa. We listen to throat singers from Central Asia, and we go, oh yeah, that evokes a feeling in our body. So it's kind of interesting to me in that we experience through the musical traditions a kind of unity in cultures that the political stuff hasn't quite caught up to that. But humans go, oh yeah, I feel that. I don't understand the language that they're singing, but boy, I feel that emotional connection to that sound. This makes my feet really want to move. Or wow, does my heart really open up when I hear that? So music is one of the things I think that we have gotten our act together around, where we're starting to see like, oh, this is part of our global use of sound as a tool, as a source of joy, as a source of connection. it's a global experience now, which is, I think, kind of interesting.
It is really interesting. And one of my favorite genres is actually Arabic music. And one of my favorite things about it is my understanding of Arabic is very limited. But not understanding what they're saying yet, having a very strong sense on a purely emotional level of what's coming through.
Oh, yeah.
There's something supremely connecting about that experience. Yep.
You're absolutely right. And people feel it, because what we have now termed as world music is an incredibly popular genre. And all these different cultural traditions are in that. And we can sample from it. In fact, artists are doing these marvelous mashups of their different traditions and making something that is unique in that it combines the two and sort of becomes this other entity. It's very, very cool time to be alive. It's a little hair-raising.
Oh, really? Whatever would you be talking about?
Hair-raising to be alive right now. But it's also, we've never had so much resource available to us before either. So it's sort of like...
so much of the world available to us.
Right. We have more tools than we've ever had, and we need to get to the place where we're, I have this idea. I'll interrupt myself. I have the idea that we're kind of culturally, we're kind of like 18-year-olds as a culture. We really want to drive the car, but we don't want to pay for the insurance, and we don't really want to pay for the gas. So we need to culturally grow up so that we recognize that all the tools and all the gifts that we receive from the earth, from the other beings that we're with on the earth, from other cultures, demand our respect, and that we have a responsibility to treat all of that in a very different way. I remember my father was a mechanic, so car references will pop up from time to time. So I remember that shift when the car, which, all of us have this kind of jalopy when we have our first car. At least I did. When that car was suddenly my full responsibility, it was a very different experience than when I was driving my parents' car. I suddenly had the responsibility for this vehicle. I had to remember when the oil had to be changed. I had to not run out of gas. I had to make sure that I didn't wreck the car because it was my car and I had to take care of it. And when we think about the world around us with that same kind of consciousness where we go, wait a minute, there is a responsibility that's involved with the power that we wield, because all the information we have is power. All the different ways that we can use our connectivity electronically is a power. So we can speak to anybody around the planet. But how are we speaking to them? How are we engaging with their cultures? How are we engaging with the other beings who we share the planet with? And I don't just mean human beings, but all the beings. How are we treating animals? How are we treating the plants, the trees? Are we thinking about our little square suburban yard and think, okay, there is the potential here for a whole ecosystem. If I stop using chemical pesticides and herbicides, if I stop having a monoculture of a lawn, what if I had native plants grow here? What if this became a tiny little oasis for the birds and animals in my region?
Yeah.
Different experience that would be.
Yeah.
Completely different way of being in the world. And I believe that that's possible.
It is, absolutely. I mean, that's where we come from, right? And I think that we, like you said, are entrained in this very narrow perspective. We don't really view us as individuals amongst this, this huge planet of billions of people and, all of these different cultures. We kind of view ourselves from a very, very isolated space. And anytime we come into contact or interface with those other people, we engage them from that perspective rather than a perspective of true engagement.
when we don't have enough mirrors around us, when we're not in connection with people, we get a distorted view about who we are. And that distorted view oftentimes has a great deal of anxiety attached to it.
Oh, God.
When we are then presented with mirrors in the world, and we have this, the alarm bells go off inside of us. We now see those mirrors as threats to the perception that we have gained about who we are and where we fit in the world in isolation. And so that whole structure helps to continue the disconnect in a lot of ways, because people get so insular, and the anxiety that comes with that insulation makes it difficult for them to perceive the mirrors that are around them. That, hey, these other beings can help us to know who we are. The trees can help us to know who we are. The river can help us to know who we are. Our neighbors, no matter how they look, can help us to know who we are.
Now, so before the show, we started to get onto a pretty interesting topic, and then, of course, had to go to a break. But you began talking about the current patriarchy that we find ourselves in, and how that always hasn't always been the case. And one of the things that fascinated me, going back to your book, was the discussion of the first shaman, and how those cultures prior to the patriarchy kind of conducted themselves. And this actually wraps in with one of the questions from the chat room. The question was, as far as, the rotund, feminine statuettes that we see, in all the archaeology books, and the certain assignments that they're given. And I'm telling you right now, Evelyn, those statuettes were one of the reasons I didn't follow through with my career as an anthropologist, because the assignments that were what I was being told by my elders, the ones that were supposed to be smarter than me, it didn't ring true. And I could not invest in that. So if you don't mind, can you go ahead and kind of go into a little bit about that history and what those beautiful pieces of art mean?
Well, I did the research and realized, because I too grew up with those images and being told they were fertility images or what have you.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah, and I realized that they span something like 38,000 years. We've been making those things for 38,000 years. The most recent one I found was about 2,000 year old in the Arctic of far eastern Asia. So we've been making these since the Upper Paleolithic, and we made them until just a few thousand years ago. So they are really important to us on some profound level. And they are not Barbies. They're not built like Barbie, they're built like older women who have had multiple pregnancies and have lived well enough to be fat. That is not something that's easy to do when you live a subsistence lifestyle. You don't see a lot of fat hunter-gatherers. And to me, that was saying something about bounty. It was saying something about a caring, grandmotherly, motherly kind of figure. I mean, those are the kind of grandmothers that I grew up with, women that looked like that. They were soft. They were nurturing. They were able to embrace you, and you felt embraced by their bodies. And so, to me, there was a sense of that image must be so important to us, because that's thousands of generations of people continuing to replicate that image. And remember, they're doing this in oral cultures. So they're carrying these little talismans, and they're teaching the next generation how important that thing is, that they have to preserve it. So at the same time I'm following that thread, I'm also looking at anthropological finds of shaman graves. And the earliest one I find referenced is in Central Europe. And I'm sure there are others around the planet. This is one that was simply found And it's a female of about the same age. She's about 45. She was using clay in a different way. Just as 12,000 years before pottery, she was firing clay, but she was making little animals. And she was firing them wet so that they would explode. Yeah, but the little figure of the little fat grandma, as I call them, the little goddess figure that she made that had her fingerprints in the clay, which is really profound, that was fired dry. So that was something that needed to not explode. So she knew how to do clay without exploding it. So she was using these animal figurines to bring spirits of animals into the world, at least in my mind. The use of effigies is very cross-cultural when you talk about shamans. And so these were all little animal figurines that were deliberately put into the fire wet so that they would explode. That's breaking it apart and setting something free. So I think she was actually seeding the world with spirits of animals so that the people could have food. She was buried with a tremendous amount of ceremony and with ritual objects. Down the line, now we come closer to our time period, there's somebody buried in what is now part of Israel. She is also buried with remarkable ceremony. She's also roughly around the same age. She is interred in the ground in a similar way with lots of red ochre, which is the color of blood. You know, it's that wonderful red earth color. And another one 9,000 years ago, also a woman. So there's this thread somehow that the female was very, very important. The feminine is showing its face in the form of that image that is repeated over and over and over again for 38,000 years.
Yeah.
Starting this earliest grave in 28,000 years ago, these shaman graves are female. So there was some sense of the female, the feminine, being that connection to nurturance and the spirit world. If you think about the mystery of birth, the whole idea that a child is born out of the darkness of a womb into the world in that flood of blood and water. And we as human beings sought caves as a place of mystery and ceremony and marked the insides of them with red ochre and also charcoal. And rituals in the deepest part of the earth, there's some very ancient awareness of the divine feminine that is a part of us. It's wired into us. It's been around a lot longer than our idea of the kind of sky god that is very common in the world's major religions. That, I think, is a result of the mixing of the indigenous cultures with the Indo-Europeans that arose in Asia and spread into Europe, also down into the Indian subcontinent, because the myth structures of, say, Greece and the Norse and the Hindu mythos are very similar in their structure, in their awareness of their gods tend to have human qualities. They tend to be kind of role models to look at of what to do and what not to do. But that is all 6,000 to 8,000 years old. I think the Hindu tradition, they say, is about 8,000 years old. The roots of it, at any rate. So that overlay is very new, and that overlay is hierarchical in a way that us understanding that we're a part of the earth and the earth is a source of nurturance is not. And I think as we move forward, we need to reclaim that awareness. And everybody has a connection to the divine feminine because we always have both energies inside of us. Yes. As we begin to lift that up to take its equal place with the divine masculine that is inside of us, lift it to its place of equality, that they dance together. I never think that we need to go back to a matriarchy. What we need to do is figure out how to lift up the divine feminine to its rightful place so that those two energies dance together in wholeness. They dance together for the preservation of Mother Earth. Because it is here on Mother Earth where we experience life. And while Father Sky holds the planet as a representation of the cosmos at large, it is here on Mother Earth where our bodies are built from her same elements, and that we breathe her atmosphere, and the waters of her body flow through our body. That sense of connection has to return, and I think examining the connection to the divine feminine that is very present in Norse shamanism and in shamanism around the world. If you scratch even a little bit, it's right there. As we develop that awareness again, we have a path to healing ourselves and the planet. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, Jill. And a nod to Bill, too. I know he's off air right now, but he's a delight as well. So it's with really a great deal of gratitude that I leave you tonight. And I know that you'll enjoy your last half hour with your other guest. And I feel very blessed to have had this experience tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Evelyn. And all of us look forward to having you back. So we will catch you on the rebound. Have a wonderful night, Evelyn. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, too.
Thank you.